In this episode, we will uncover the Manaslu climb where these egoistic men mocked Sherpas, and they died after. Built on ego and raw athleticism, they believed muscle could replace experience and mocked the men, keeping them alive as too small to matter. The result was a chain of stupid choices, so disastrous that it left the mountaineering community completely horrified. It was September 15th, 2016, and afternoon clouds were swallowing the upper ramparts of Manaslu when Tyler Brandt and Garrett Hollis walked into base camp at 15,100 feet on the moraine above the Manaslu Glacier. The camp occupied a sprawl of rubble and compacted ice in Nepal's Gorkha district, ringed by ridgelines that stole sunlight by mid-afternoon. Prayer flags snapped between boulders and tent poles in wind that carried the smell of kerosene stoves and dalbat. Beneath everything, the glacier groaned, deep structural complaints from ice under pressure. About 60 climbers occupied the camp across 8 expeditions, reflecting Manaslu's growing reputation as a stepping stone to Everest. A government liaison officer sat in a tent at the camp's edge, filing permits and playing no role in the decisions that would follow. Tyler was 34, from Scottsdale, Arizona. He had played Division I linebacker at Arizona State, earned the second-team all-conference honors, and carried the frame that came with it. 6'2", 215 pounds, broad through the shoulders in a way that made most rooms feel smaller when he entered. After football, he had opened a chain of performance training gyms across the Phoenix metro that catered to former athletes and weekend competitors, willing to pay premium rates for serious atmosphere. He was loud, competitive, and accustomed to being the most physically capable person in any space he occupied. His mountaineering experience consisted of guided climbs on Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua at 22,837 feet, a Thektu, both completed without technical difficulty, both treated as endurance challenges rather than climbing objectives. Aconcagua satisfied Nepal's permit requirement for a previous peak above 6,500 meters. It was the credential that opened the door to Manaslu, a door that should have stayed closed. Garrett Hollis was 36, from Tampa, Florida, Tyler's college roommate at Arizona State and closest friend. He had enlisted in the Marines after graduation, completed 2 combat deployments to Helmand Province, and transitioned into defense contracting after leaving active duty. 6'3", 225 pounds, quieter than Tyler but built from the same fundamental assumption that mental toughness and physical conditioning could override anything the world presented. He had climbed Denali at 20,310 feet and Aconcagua, giving him a slightly stronger resume, though neither man had experienced the sustained high-altitude exposure that Manaslu demanded. Where Tyler led with volume, Garrett led with silence that carried the same dismissiveness underneath. Together they reinforced each other's worst instincts. Individually, either might have listened. Together, neither would. They had each paid $20,000 to join an expedition led by Dawa Sangbu, a Nepali operator running mid-tier commercial climbs out of Kathmandu. Dawa had accepted them despite their thin resumes because they met permit requirements, paid in full, and signed liability waivers. His operation ran a 3-camp structure with no high camp on the summit pyramid. Skipping the Camp 4, some operators placed around 24,300 feet to save cost and Sherpa labor. This stretched the summit day to nearly 3,800 vertical feet from Camp 3. Brutal even for well-acclimatized climbers. The expedition did not include supplemental oxygen as standard. Emergency bottles would be carried by support staff for medical use only. Tyler and Garrett didn't question this. If anything, they approved. Supplemental oxygen was for weaker climbers. Their high-altitude guide was Karsang Jangbu, 41, from Tame Village in the Khumbu. 20 years of guiding experience across the Himalaya, 6 Everest summits, 4 Manaslu summits, 2 on Cho Oyu. He was small, even by Sherpa standards, 5'5", 130 pounds, with weathered hands and a directness in his safety assessments that earned trust from experienced clients and friction from those who confused honesty with timidity. He supported a wife and 4 children. His eldest daughter had recently started university in Kathmandu at roughly $2,500 per year, a significant burden on guiding wages. His season pay was $5,000 base with a $2,000 summit bonus. He had taken the assignment after the operator assured him the clients were fit and motivated. Fit turned out to be accurate. Motivated would prove to be the problem. A younger assistant Sherpa in his late 20s handled load carries and camp logistics and would carry 2 emergency oxygen bottles on the summit push alongside rope and basic rescue gear. He operated in a support role without authority to override client decisions. The tension that mattered ran entirely through Karsang. The size disparity was obvious the moment they shook hands. Tyler looked down at Karsang and remarked that he hadn't expected his guide to be so compact, delivered with a half laugh and a shoulder clap that was slightly too hard, not overtly cruel, deniable as humor. But the dynamic it established was immediate. Tyler saw a small man, not a 20-year veteran, and the gap between those two perceptions would define everything that followed. Garrett said nothing to correct it, which carried its own meaning. During the expedition briefing, Dawa outlined the route, acclimatization schedule, avalanche protocols, and turnaround times. He stressed that Manaslu's primary killer was avalanche. The slopes between camps were swept regularly by slides that could bury entire route sections, and timing movement through these zones was non-negotiable. Tyler and Garrett sat through it, half attending, talking between themselves. Tyler asked how much weight they would carry compared to the Sherpas, a question that implied the real work on the mountain was hauling loads, not making decisions. Neither engaged with the avalanche protocols beyond nods that meant nothing. The first rotation to Camp 1 at 17,400 feet started on September 18th. Tyler and Garrett moved fast. Their fitness was real at lower altitudes. They outpaced other clients on the glacier, their long strides eating ground that smaller climbers covered in more steps. Tyler commented that Karsang was holding them back. Karsang explained that pace through exposed avalanche terrain mattered more than raw speed, that moving fast through the wrong zone at the wrong time created more risk than moving steadily at the right time. Tyler waved this off without engagement. At Camp 1, both men were talkative and energetic while others rested. The altitude hadn't touched them yet, and they treated that early comfort as proof the mountain was within their control. The second rotation to Camp 2 at 21,300 feet changed the arithmetic. The route crossed Manaslu's major avalanche path. The Tearik and broad, steep slopes where debris from previous slides lay visible in the snow as broken blocks and buried rope. Karsang timed their departure to minimize exposure, moving the team through the danger zone early and at steady pace. Tyler and Garrett were noticeably slower than the first rotation. Above 20,000 feet, their large frames worked against them. More muscle mass demanded more oxygen per step, and the cardiovascular advantage they had carried at lower began shrinking against the relentless arithmetic of thin air. Neither acknowledged the change. At Camp 2, Karsang checked oxygen saturations. Tyler read 76%, Garrett 78%. Without supplemental oxygen, acceptable but on the low edge for this altitude at this stage, Karsang recommended they take acclimatization seriously. Tyler cited his resting heart rate of 48 at sea level, as if a number from a climate-controlled gym in Scottsdale transferred to 21,000 feet on a Himalayan glacier. The third rotation to Camp 3 at 23,000 feet exposed what fitness could not cover. The route above Camp 2 crossed additional avalanche terrain before reaching the plateau below the summit pyramid. Tyler developed a dry, hacking cough, common at altitude, but a potential marker for fluid buildup in the lungs. His pace had dropped sharply. Garrett slowed too, masking it with a military habit of never displaying weakness. At Camp 3, saturations read 71 for Tyler and 73 for Garrett, both concerning for climbers facing a summit push above 26,000 feet without bottled oxygen. Karsang recommended an extra acclimatization night at Camp 2 on the descent. Tyler dismissed it with a remark about not needing advice from someone who weighed less than his leg press warm-up, delivered with just enough humor for deniability. But the message landed clean. Garrett backed him, with a redirect rather than a matching insult. They had been in harder situations. They knew their bodies. They would manage. The disrespect accumulated through small acts that were individually deniable and collectively unmistakable. Tyler handed his pack to Karsang at rest stops without asking, just held it out and waited. When Karsang explained avalanche timing, Tyler looked at Garrett and rolled his eyes. They discussed Karsang in third person, while he stood 3 feet away. Observations about whether he was always this cautious, exchanged as though the man they were describing only existed when spoken to directly. Garrett asked Karsang to carry a portable speaker and charging brick, and when Karsang explained weight priorities for safety gear, Garrett referenced carrying heavier loads in Helmand province in a way that made Karsang sound like he was complaining rather than explaining protocol. The assistant Sherpa witnessed everything and said nothing. One climber from another team mentioned to Karsang at Camp 2 that the two Americans seemed difficult. Karsang acknowledged it without elaboration. There was nothing to elaborate on that wasn't already visible. He raised concerns with Dawa via radio. Tyler and Garrett were underperforming, their numbers trended low, and their refusal to accept guidance compounded every other risk factor. The lack of a high camp meant the summit day was exceptionally long, and these clients would struggle above 25,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. Dawa acknowledged the concern, but noted both men remained within acceptable parameters, had not broken explicit rules, and had signed waivers. Unless Karsang could identify a medical emergency, the expedition continued. It was the same answer guides received on every commercial climb when the clients were paying, and the numbers weren't yet catastrophic. Back at base camp between rotations, Tyler's cough didn't fully clear. It improved at lower altitude, but persisted, a hack he dismissed as dry air irritation. Karsang noted that a cough worsening with altitude and lingering at base camp could signal early fluid accumulation, a precursor to pulmonary edema. He told Tyler directly. Tyler responded that he had coughed after workouts his entire life, and it had never meant anything. The conversation ended there. Around October 1st, forecasts showed a window, 36 to 48 hours of reduced wind, beginning October 2nd. Dawa confirmed the plan. Depart Camp 2 on the 1st, reach Camp 3 by early afternoon, rest, then push for the summit from Camp 3 at midnight. Turnaround set at 10 a.m. regardless of position. Descending through avalanche terrain in afternoon warmth was unacceptable. Tyler and Garrett reached Camp 3 on schedule. Tyler's cough had returned productive. Phlegm now, consistent with worsening pulmonary congestion. His breathing was labored even at rest, each exhale carrying effort that shouldn't have been present while sitting. Garrett was quieter than usual, face drawn and angular where weeks of altitude had stripped weight. Appetite gone. Saturations at Camp 3, Tyler 68%, Garrett 71%, both without supplemental oxygen. Karsang sat with them in their tent and laid it out plainly. Tyler's saturation combined with his worsening cough meant his lungs were failing to process the air. Continuing higher without oxygen would accelerate the damage, possibly rapidly. The emergency bottles were short-duration reserves for descent support. They could not sustain a multi-hour summit push. Garrett's numbers were marginally better, but still concerning for nearly 4,000 vertical feet of climbing ahead. Quick reminder, if this kind of in-depth breakdown matters to you, subscribing helps keep these stories coming. Now let's get back to the mountain. The absence of a high camp made this summit day longer than on most Manaslu expeditions, compounding every risk. He recommended they skip the window, descend, and try again if a later window opened. Tyler's response: they had not traveled halfway around the world and paid $20,000 to sit in a tent while other teams summited. Garrett backed him. He had functioned on less sleep and in worse conditions, and a number on a device the size of a clothespin wasn't making the decision for him. Karsang radioed Dawa. Dawa reiterated the turnaround time and authorized the push. Midnight, October 2nd. Clear skies, moderate wind, roughly minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit before wind chill. Karsang led, Tyler and Garrett behind, the assistant Sherpa at the rear with 2 sealed emergency oxygen bottles, rope, and rescue gear. The terrain above Camp 3 crossed the broad plateau before steepening into the summit pyramid's lower slopes, where fixed ropes marked the route up increasingly technical ground. For 2 hours, the pace was slow but functional. Tyler coughed frequently, wet, deep sounds that carried in the frozen stillness. Garrett moved mechanically, his steps deliberate, but lacking the fluid rhythm of a climber within his capacity. Above 24,000 feet, both men slowed dramatically. Tyler's stops grew longer, every 15 steps, then every 10. His cough was constant, and in the beam of Karsang's headlamp, his breathing was visible as rapid, shallow effort that never seemed to pull enough air. Between coughing fits, each exhale carried a faint wet rattle that had not been present at Camp 3, the sound of fluid accumulating where air should have been. Garrett's coordination began degrading. He fumbled a carabiner transition on the fixed rope, a mechanical task that should have been automatic by now, and needed Karsang to step back and assist. The slowdown was not fatigue the way athletes understood fatigue. It was the systematic failure of bodies not receiving enough oxygen to sustain the work being demanded of them. Around 25,200 feet, their pace made the summit mathematically impossible before the 10 a.m. turnaround. Karsang stopped and told them directly they would not reach the top within the margin. They were in deteriorating condition, without supplemental oxygen, and every foot gained from here made the descent more dangerous with no realistic summit chance. They needed a turnaround now. Tyler responded that Karsang had been trying to turn them around since Camp 2, and it hadn't worked yet. A statement that treated every prior warning as evidence of excessive caution rather than accumulating proof. Garrett invoked the military framing one final time. He had survived selection courses designed to break men, and a mountain was not going to make him quit. The tone was not aggressive, it was dismissive and final, the kind of statement that closed a conversation by declaring it irrelevant. Tyler unclipped from the fixed line and moved past Karsang. Not a shove, the movement of a large man who had decided the smaller man in front of him was furniture stepping around him, the way someone navigates an obstacle that doesn't warrant acknowledgement. The physical disparity made resistance impractical without creating a confrontation that could kill everyone on the rope. Garrett followed without looking at Karsang as he passed. Karsang and the assistant Sherpa faced the choice every guide dreads. Letting them go meant abandoning clients to near certain death. Following meant entering worsening conditions with men who refused every piece of guidance offered, risking 4 lives instead of 2. Karsang followed. The assistant Sherpa followed Karsang. It was not the right decision in any direction. It was the only one that let them live with themselves if the clients survived. Above 25,500 feet, wind built steadily as dawn approached. The forecast window was holding, but gusts pushed spindrift across the slopes in horizontal streams and dropped visibility between sustained bursts. Tyler's pace turned erratic, short clusters of 5 or 6 steps followed by prolonged stops bent over his ice axe, coughing in rattling fits that bent him at the waist. Between fits, his breathing carried the wet, crackling sound of fluid in the lungs, each exhale audibly heavier than the last. He was drowning by increments at altitude, his lungs filling faster than his body could clear them. Around 25,600 feet, Karsang deployed emergency oxygen. The assistant Sherpa cracked the first bottle, and Karsang fitted the mask over Tyler's face. Tyler was too depleted to resist or assist, his hands hanging at his sides while Karsang worked the straps. The flow stabilized him marginally, but could not reverse edema that had been building across days of climbing. It bought time, it did not buy recovery. Tyler collapsed at roughly 25,800 feet. He sat down in the snow during what should have been a brief rest and did not get back up. His body sagged sideways, breathing rapid and shallow, even with supplemental flow, eyes open but unfocused in a way that suggested his brain was no longer processing what they saw. Karsang reached him quickly. Tyler was semi-conscious, faintly responsive to voice, completely unable to coordinate movement or follow instruction. His lips carried a bluish tint visible even in the gray light of early dawn. The edema had progressed past the point where his lungs could exchange enough oxygen to sustain basic function. Without immediate descent to lower altitude and medical intervention, he would die where he sat. Karsang told Garrett they needed to begin lowering Tyler immediately. Every minute at this altitude accelerated the damage. Garrett's response was to grab Tyler's arm and try to haul him upright, pulling with both hands as though the problem were motivation rather than physiology. Tyler could not stand. His legs folded each time Garrett pulled. Garrett tried again, his own movements clumsy, his strength gutted by altitude in ways his body had never experienced. The man who could deadlift 400 pounds at sea level could not lift his closest friend off the snow at 25,800 feet. Weeks of altitude and caloric deficit had stripped Tyler to roughly 195 pounds, but dead weight at nearly 26,000 feet might as well be 1,000. Karsang and the assistant Sherpa rigged a short rope system, clipping Tyler between them, and began lowering him toward Camp 3, nearly 3,000 feet below. Tyler's weight pulled unpredictably, sagging, shifting, dragging against the slope in ways that threw off the precise footwork the terrain demanded. The angle required controlled, deliberate movement on hard ice and wind-compacted snow, and every lurch from Tyler's body threatened to pull the entire system off balance. Garrett was supposed to descend alongside under his own power, but his deterioration had accelerated sharply. The effort of trying to lift Tyler, combined with hours of climbing without supplemental oxygen, had emptied his reserves. He stumbled repeatedly, his boots wandering off the packed route, his reactions to rope commands arriving seconds too late. The second and final emergency bottle was cracked for Garrett. It steadied him slightly. It did not restore function. The fall happened on a steep section around 25,400 feet. Tyler's weight shifted suddenly as the slope angle steepened, dragging Karsang off balance, his crampons skidding on hard ice beneath a layer of wind-packed snow. The fixed line held for a moment as Karsang fought to reset his footing. Then Garrett lost his footing entirely and fell sideways into Karsang. 205 pounds struck 130. The impact tore Karsang's grip from his ice axe and wrenched him off his stance. The fixed rope caught the fall after roughly 40 feet. A violent jolt that snapped through harnesses and anchors with enough force to wrench joints and compress spines. Karsang slammed into the slope, spine first, against a ridge of hard-packed ice that ran across the face like a shallow step. The assistant Sherpa, clipped in above the impact, was jerked off his feet, but arrested after a short slide. Karsang knew immediately that something fundamental had broken. Numbness spread below his waist, alternating with sharp, electric jolts of pain whenever he tried to shift. He could move his arms. His legs would not respond reliably. Standing was impossible without assistance. The compressed vertebrae in his lumbar spine had done what weeks of accumulated risk had not, ended his ability to function on the slope. Tyler lay motionless, 15 feet below, his emergency oxygen mask torn free in the tumble and hissing its remaining supply into open air. His breathing, if it continued, was too shallow to detect from where Karsang lay. Garrett had come to rest against the fixed line 10 feet down, moving feebly, a hand shifting, a boot scraping without purpose, but unable to stand, speak, or respond to anything Karsang tried to communicate through the wind. The assistant Sherpa reached Karsang first, confirmed he was secured to the line, and radioed Camp 3 and Base Camp with a message stripped to essentials. 2 clients down, lead guide, with a spinal injury, unable to walk, requesting any available support. The response was slow. Other teams at Camp 3 were resting for their own summit pushes, or had already departed upward. 2 Sherpas from another expedition began climbing toward them, but the distance and altitude meant hours would pass before they arrived. Tyler died first. His breathing transitioned from shallow, wet gasps to intermittent silence over the course of roughly 90 minutes, without descent and without the supplemental oxygen that had been lost when his mask tore free. The pulmonary edema completed what days of altitude exposure had started. The gasping slowed. The intervals of silence stretched longer. Then the silence held and did not break. Karsang lay close enough to hear it happen. Garrett died in the hours that followed. He never regained coherence after the fall. His movements, feeble to begin with, slowed to occasional twitches, then stopped entirely. Whether cerebral edema, hypothermia, or a head injury from the tumble killed him became academic. By the time the 2 Sherpas from the other expedition reached the site, Garrett had been still long enough that checking was a formality. The rescue team evacuated Karsang to Camp 3, then Camp 2, lowering him methodically across terrain that punished every error. He was airlifted to Kathmandu when weather allowed. Doctors confirmed 2 compressed vertebrae in his lumbar spine. He regained the ability to walk after months of rehabilitation, but the damage left chronic pain that made carrying loads at altitude impossible. His guiding career ended at 41. He returned to Tem and took work managing a trekking lodge at a fraction of his former income. His daughter stayed in university. The finances were tight but manageable. Tyler and Garrett's bodies were left where they fell. Recovery at that altitude was impractical without risking more lives. News coverage focused on 2 American climbers, their athletic backgrounds, their friendship. Karsang's injury received a single line in one article. The assistant Sherpa finished the season intact, but declined future assignments with underqualified clients. On Manaslu, the mountain does not care who is bigger, who is stronger, or who paid more. It only asks one question, whether you listen to the people who understood it, and it does not ask twice. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.